Almost everyone who's heard of the WOW signal believes two things about it. First, that it might be humanity's best ever evidence of alien life. Second, that scientists finally explained it in 2024 and it turned out to be natural. Neither one of those is actually true. Not the way most videos tell it. The real story is stranger, messier, and, according to the people who actually study signals like this for a living, still completely unresolved. This is what actually happened and what we actually know. On the night of August 15, 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope in Delaware, Ohio, was doing what it did every night, slowly scanning the sky, hunting for exactly one thing, as part of the longest-running search for extraterrestrial intelligence in history. Nobody was watching in real time. The data just printed out onto paper, line by line, for someone to review later. 3 days later, a volunteer astronomer named E.H. Mann was going through the printouts by hand when he found something that stopped him cold. A string of characters, far stronger than anything around it, sitting almost exactly on a very specific, very meaningful frequency. He grabbed a red pen, circled it, and wrote one word in the margin. Wow. Here's why that specific frequency mattered so much. Hydrogen is the single most common element in the universe, and it naturally emits radiation at almost exactly 1,420 megahertz. Back in 1959, physicists proposed that any advanced civilization looking to contact others would probably transmit near this frequency, since it's a kind of universal constant, something every technological species anywhere would likely already know about. Radio astronomers have a nickname for this region of the spectrum, the water hole. It sits between the frequency hydrogen emits and the frequency hydroxyl emits, and hydrogen plus hydroxyl makes water. The idea is almost poetic. If civilizations across the galaxy were ever going to gather somewhere to meet symbolically, this would be the watering hole. The WOW signal landed almost perfectly inside it. Now, here's the first thing people consistently get wrong. That code, 6EQUJ5, gets treated online like it might be an encoded alien message. It isn't. It's not a message at all. It's simply the observatory's own intensity scale, a space or number or letter representing how strong the signal was at each 10-second interval, nothing more. There's a second misunderstanding, and this one's more interesting. The signal appears to rise, peak, and fall over 72 seconds, and a lot of retellings treat that rise and fall as the signal itself doing something dramatic. But radio astronomers point out that the Big Ear telescope couldn't track a single point in the sky. It just sat still and let Earth's own rotation carry the sky past it. Any constant, unchanging source sitting in that patch of sky would automatically look like it rises and falls over that same 72 seconds, purely because of how the telescope worked. The source itself could have been sitting there unchanged for years before and after. We simply don't know because we only happen to be looking at that exact moment. There's another wrinkle almost nobody outside astronomy circles knows about. Big Ear didn't have one detector, it had two, called feed horns, each aimed at a very slightly different patch of sky. The WOW signal showed up clearly in one horn. It never appeared in the other. Because of how the data was processed, nobody can say for certain which horn actually caught it, which means there are two possible regions of sky the signal could have come from, and to this day, we don't know which one is correct. This detail matters for another reason too. It's part of why astronomers are fairly confident the source wasn't something physically close to the telescope. Local interference, something nearby on Earth, would likely have shown up in both horns at once. Something that only appeared in one strongly suggests the source was genuinely distant. What happened next is honestly the most undertold part of this story. Eamon searched for the signal again using Big Ear itself in the months right after. Nothing. In 1987 and 1989, another astronomer searched using a completely different array. Nothing. In 1995, a radio telescope in West Virginia tried. Nothing. That same year and the next, someone pointed the Very Large Array, vastly more sensitive than Big Ear ever was, directly at the coordinates. Nothing. In 1999, a team in Tasmania ran 6 separate 14-hour observations. Nothing. As recently as 2022, the SETI Institute coordinated 2 of the most advanced instruments on Earth, the Green Bank Telescope and the Allen Telescope Array, in the first ever joint search targeting the WOW signal's most likely candidate stars. They found nothing resembling a technosignature. That's not one failed search. That's essentially 50 years on multiple continents using 6 or 7 completely different telescopes, and not one of them has ever heard it again. In 2016, one researcher proposed a clean, natural explanation: that a passing comet and the cloud of hydrogen gas surrounding it happened to drift through the telescope's field of view. It named a real object, Comet 266P/Christensen, and pointed to follow-up observations that did detect faint radio emissions from comets at similar frequencies. It didn't hold up. Astronomers, including members of the original Big Ear team, dismantled it on multiple fronts. The comet in question wasn't even in the telescope's beam at the right time. Comets don't emit strongly at this frequency to begin with. And the theory offered no explanation at all for the single most distinctive feature of the signal: why it would appear in one feed horn and not the other, something a slow-moving diffuse cloud of cometary gas simply couldn't produce. One professional astronomer who reviewed the underlying paper afterward described it as unconvincing on almost every count, published without the basic comparisons or predictions real astronomical analysis would require. Most researchers in the field now consider the comet explanation effectively closed. The theory that made real headlines in 2024 came from a completely different direction. A team led by astronomer Mendez went back through archive data from the Arecibo Observatory, hunting for anything resembling the WOW signal's exact signature. They found it: fainter but strikingly similar signals coming from small, cold clouds of hydrogen scattered through the galaxy. Their hypothesis? Something extraordinarily energetic, a flare from a magnetar, one of the densest, most magnetically violent objects known to exist, or a related burst called a soft gamma repeater, struck one of these cold clouds and caused it to briefly glow far brighter than normal, in a laser-like beam of radio energy. In physics, that mechanism is called a maser. This is genuinely the strongest natural candidate anyone has proposed. It would explain the strength, the frequency, and why it's never repeated. The exact conditions needed might simply never line up again in our lifetimes. But even Mendez has been careful to say this doesn't solve the mystery. It narrows down where to look next, and an outside SETI astronomer who reviewed the theory pointed out something important. This exact kind of maser flare from a magnetar hitting a hydrogen cloud has never actually been directly observed happening anywhere in the universe. The physical conditions required are, in his words, extremely delicate and specific. And it isn't fully clear the mechanism is even physically possible the way the theory describes. There's a third, serious hypothesis almost nobody covers, and it's the most interesting one. Physicist Jim Benford proposed that the signal could have come from power beaming, a focused beam of energy, potentially from real alien technology, but not a deliberate message aimed at us at all. Think less hello, more accidentally catching a flicker of someone else's engine exhaust as it swept past. The elegant part of this idea is that it explains every strange property of the signal at once, including why it's never repeated. A narrow beam sweeping across the sky would only cross our exact position once, briefly, then move on forever. When another scientist challenged Benford on why any civilization would restrict such a beam to such a narrow slice of the radio spectrum, the answer turned out to be technical, not arbitrary. Narrow bandwidth is actually a requirement for efficient, high-power beaming systems, not a strange design choice. This theory doesn't claim to prove anything either, but it's a serious, physics-grounded possibility that treats maybe it was technological without needing it to be a greeting card aimed at Earth. Here's the part that changed how I understand this whole story. A radio astronomer who specializes in exactly this kind of transient signal, someone whose actual job is figuring out what unexplained radio blips are, has laid out her honest professional opinion. And it's more grounded than almost anything else you'll find on this topic. Her first point? In science, it's genuinely difficult to say anything certain about a signal you've only ever seen once. She described working on a real, recent case, a strange transient radio signal that stayed on for 4 minutes, then vanished and never came back. No confirmed explanation, just an honest, "We saw this strange thing." Her second point cuts even deeper. In her professional experience, the single most common source of mystery signals isn't natural astrophysics, and it isn't aliens. It's ordinary human radio interference, and it can be shockingly hard to catch. She described tracking down what looked like a genuine astronomical signal in her own data, only to eventually discover it was French television broadcast audio, bouncing off ionized trails left behind by meteors burning up in the atmosphere and getting picked up by her telescope from thousands of miles away. Her honest assessment of the WOW signal? More likely than not, some form of interference we simply haven't identified. Not confirmed aliens, not the comet, and not yet confidently the hydrogen cloud theory either. There's one more detail that matters more than almost anything else here. The equipment at Big Ear was only ever built to record signal strength, never the actual waveform or any modulation within it. Which means even in the best possible case, even if this really was an alien transmission, there was never any way to know if it contained information at all. Nothing was lost that we could have decoded. There was simply nothing recorded that a message could have survived inside. Which brings me to the part of this story I think matters most. An amateur radio astronomer named Robert Gray spent literally decades of his life chasing this signal, using some of the largest radio telescopes on the planet, entirely independent, entirely self-taught, with no institutional backing, simply because he refused to let the question go. In his final years, he partnered with astronomer David Kipping on one last idea. What if the signal wasn't a one-time event or a strictly periodic beacon, but something in between? A source that repeats, just unpredictably, the way radioactive decay happens on no fixed schedule. They modeled it mathematically. Based on Big Ear's original data alone, a signal like that had roughly a 1 in 3 chance of matching what was seen. But once you factor in every other search across every telescope over every subsequent decade, all of them silent, that probability drops all the way down to under 2%. Improbable, they concluded. Not impossible, just improbable. Robert Gray died in December 2021 at 73 years old. The paper was finished and published without him. His collaborator later said that Gray's real legacy wasn't a single answer. It was proof that the process of searching, stubbornly, for decades, without ever getting a clean resolution, can be the most valuable part of the whole endeavor. Before the close, it's worth knowing how differently this story gets treated once it leaves science. In 2012, on the signal's 35th anniversary, Arecibo Observatory beamed a message back toward the general direction of some candidate stars. Not the right ones, as it turned out, since the actual origin was still unknown. The transmission was largely a publicity stunt for a television network, made up of thousands of solicited social media messages, and the transmitter reportedly overheated partway through. The signal has since shown up in a Netflix science fiction series, a 1990s episode of The X-Files, and, as of this year, gave its name to a rock album. Popular culture has mostly decided this story needs a tidy ending. The actual scientists working on it have spent 50 years refusing to give it one. So here's where this actually leaves us. Not probably aliens, not basically solved by a theory from 2024. A scientist who studies exactly this kind of signal for a living leans toward an identified, or more likely still unidentified, piece of interference. The leading natural theory admits it hasn't fully proven its own mechanism is even possible, and a serious technological explanation exists that was never about a message to us at all. Every single one of those honest positions has more integrity than a confident headline claiming it's finally been figured out. Maybe the real story was never really about the signal. Maybe it's about the fact that people spent entire careers, in some cases entire lives, refusing to stop asking a question that still doesn't have an answer. That's a much harder story to tell than aliens. It's also the true one.